Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Backroom Brief, where we interview small business owners to understand their struggles and their stories. Here today, I have Samir Suri, an up-and-coming tech entrepreneur who's excited to tell us what his business is about. Hello, Samir.
Hi there.
How's it going?
Good. How about you?
Doing well. Let's talk a little bit more. What do you do?
I am a CEO of a small business, Paradigm Reality Enhancement Laboratories. We're a R&D company, and generally work on VR hardware and AR hardware as well sometimes.
Can you explain us what VR and AR more specifically is when applied to your work?
So for us, VR and AR are, virtual reality and augmented reality, right? So with virtual reality, you are basically uh, put into a simulation of a 3D world in which you can interact with and move around in. Right, in with AR, we try to augment your existing world, so we'll take elements from this other reality and augment them on top of your existing reality, as a way to, let's say, give you directions or help you figure out what to wear. These sorts of things that augment your existing real experiences versus like virtual reality, which is creating new virtual realities, virtual existences in which you can do what you would like.
What first kind of motivated you to go into the VR and AR space?
Well, I think a lot of it was in 2020. There was definitely a point where people were kind of stuck at home, right? I had also gotten a VR headset at the time. The Oculus Quest 2 had just launched, and I had got one for myself. And using it was interesting to me. I was able to interact with these interesting communities that I had never really seen before, and also observe sort of the current state of the industry at that time, and look at older versions and newer versions of this hardware and see this development happening and be excited by where it was and where it was going. I was very interested in that space and getting started and working inside of it.
Well, when you started your VR company, was there out of all that learning, was there some problem that you hoped to solve?
Yeah. I guess the general sort of thing for our company is that, you see, VR is based on a lot of proprietary and hidden technologies, right? Algorithms and computer vision and all these sorts of other very complicated um, programs that help enable virtual reality and augmented reality to even run in the first place. So, kind of our mission statement was to make these sort of proprietary technologies open, right? Reverse engineer them, design new ones, provide, these commodities that are normally segmented to a population who has lots of money, to everybody, and allow other manufacturers to also then create their own implementations using our algorithms that we designed. So in this case, I started with like facial expressions, mouth tracking and eye tracking. And eye tracking was a big one. So I wrote a bunch of eye tracking algorithms about 2020, 2021, to sort of promote eye tracking technology to the masses and to get it into VR headsets that didn't have eye tracking built in. So yeah, that's kind of like what we do is we make proprietary technologies open to the world, and then we productize them in different ways, either by selling hardware or by selling the technology itself, licensing the code and whatnot.
What's your product exactly?
Well, we sell multiple products. The one that we're selling right now is the Bowel Mouth Tracker, which is a mouth tracking camera. You put it on the bottom of your headset and it tracks your mouth, and then a complex algorithm slash neural network turns that image into a bunch of basically like facial expressions that your avatar can relay in virtual reality to people who are looking at your avatar. And then obviously our eye tracking algorithms have also been around for some time. But we're primarily a company that both creates hardware and then licenses our software as well, while still keeping it like source available to allow people to sort of learn from our designs.
Is there a primary group of people you normally target with this eye tracking and mouth tracking software?
Yeah, mostly VR enthusiasts, and people who are sort of interested in this technology are obviously very interested. A lot of our stuff is DIY, so you can do it yourself as well. Like, you don't have to buy a hardware, you can do it yourself. And so a lot of people do play around with this. So mainly enthusiasts, hobbyists, DIYers, and then we obviously sell our own hardware product to people who don't wish to do that but wish to actually still utilize that technology. So that's kind of our primary audience is sort of anyone and everyone that we can. But at the same time, our main product that we sell primarily targets mostly enthusiasts.
Do you expect that to change at all with the average common day person like me and the viewer?
I would say probably not. VR itself has to first gain mainstream adoption, which Meta has tried and unfortunately not been so successful on. And then you also have, the facial expression tracking. Social VR is another niche within itself, right? So you have like a niche within a niche within a niche. You're already 3 niches down. It's very unlikely that the average person is going to be using this. But the people who are in that niche of niche are still still quite a bit of people, but maybe not exactly mainstream.
Do you have any competition at all in that really niche area?
We actually used to. Meta themselves, another company called HTC, both used to be competition for us, but they individually sort of dropped out due to the fact that it is so niche, right? There's no real customer base to support such a large company and a large product, right? So producing at mass with such a large base of users is easy, but producing at mass when the base of users is quite small requires you to do a lot of uphill work to make it into the mainstream, which they weren't able to do. And so they kind of just dropped out themselves because they're a big company and they couldn't sustain themselves on such a small user base. And that's expected to change over the years as these sort of features get more and more available to more and more headsets. We expect that this niche within a niche will grow. But it's certainly not easy right now for a large company to sustain itself off such a small market.
So effectively right now you have a monopoly.
You could say that, I guess. We were graciously gifted a monopoly by our own competitors. So I don't know if you can call that a monopoly exactly, because we didn't try to buy these companies out and crush them or anything. We simply kept developing our technology by ourselves. We sort of kept doing it without external influence, and we just ended up lasting longer than anyone else. And so we're still here and they're not here. Yeah.
Now that you guys have outlasted the market per se, do you guys have any new features coming soon, or?
Yeah, well, you see, in our line of work, the word of the day is accuracy and improving that accuracy. We strive to, improve the accuracy of our systems to make them more accurate in tracking your mouth, more accurate in tracking your eyes, right? So our improvements are iterative and over time, almost always to that accuracy point, right? Making it more accurate, making it fail less, making, different parts of the tracking more accurate. So accuracy is the name of the game there. We have other hardware products coming out. We're trying to develop an eye tracking hardware product. This might come out, we hope, next year. But of course it's still, in deep development, so we'll see if it ever makes the light of day. But we are developing eye tracking hardware, dedicated eye tracking hardware. And then we're working with some other companies on developing, integrations for their headsets directly into our technology. Like the face tracking will be directly integrated into headsets, similar to the larger competitors that we used to have, so that they can kind of utilize our technology while it's still being embedded inside of a headset, so it's convenient for a user to use. These are sort of the things that we think about.
Let's shift gears for a second and let's look at the back end of your business. How have you funded, which seemingly, in my point of view, is a very capital heavy product?
Yeah, so we primarily take pre-orders for a lot of our things. So with pre-orders, you have a batch rollout schedule. So you do your pre-orders, right? And you get some X amount of people. And normally what we do is we do rolling pre-orders, where our pre-orders don't actually ever close. We just keep having people place new orders on pre-order. And then we basically slowly ramp up our production to meet that demand. In this case, what happens is when we get pre-orders, we first batch it out. So after people have placed pre-orders, we say, okay, well, from the first 3 months of pre-orders, we'll take that and assemble it into a single batch, and that batch gets sent to the factory as an order, and the factory produces it and sends it to our distribution center, right? So primarily we build capital through pre-orders, and then we sort of batch out our overall, order system, and we batch out and send individual pallets of maybe 500 to 1,000 units to our distribution center. And so over time we catch up with our pre-orders, and then from there we go out of pre-orders into just normal ordering, where it's within 2 weeks normally-ish, 2 weeks-ish normally. And so we continue to have it on stock. So yeah, it's kind of the way it works, I guess, with funding and capital, I guess.
Pre-orders, from my point of view, whenever I see it, it seems like it requires a lot of trust from your customers. How have you guys been able to build that?
Yeah, so when we first started out, we were an open source project for some time, right? So that in itself is already pretty transparent. And we've shipped units in the past, right? We shipped older versions of our hardware mouth tracking unit in the past, and those work well. And so there's trust there too that we will ship because we've shipped in the past. But a lot of our thing is also to do with transparency, keeping customers informed about the parts of the production that are going on behind the scenes to, give them their product that they paid for. So keeping that transparency to your customer base is really important to building that trust in the first place. You can't have them place a pre-order and, months later they haven't heard anything that they're going to trust you, right? You have to give updates. We give about weekly updates, maybe bi-weekly updates, depending on how many updates we have. And we give these updates and we then, tell our users how the production on their system or tracker or whatever it is going.
Have you ever faced any challenges on this pre-order system?
Yeah, delays are inevitable, obviously. For a small company like us, there's lots of little delays here and there. Other companies who we work with to produce our things mess up. It causes a delay of a week, and then others mess up and it's 2 weeks, and logistics itself and shipping is long. So there's always delays. You can never really accurately tell what happens. The worst one is when there's some sort of, failure in the product itself. Maybe the board design or electrical design or mechanical design of it is flawed in some way, and you have to really quick go back to the drawing board and fix some small issue. Well, that's a delay they're looking at for multiple weeks now. So I think the biggest challenge is definitely like delays and meeting expectations of our user bases and of our customer bases.
Do you employ any forms of marketing, after these delays to make sure the retainment stays up?
Overall, as long as you're transparent, your retainment will stay pretty much the same. Unless you obviously have a competitor, in this case we don't, then the amount of people you retain will be the same. In our case, we didn't do any marketing, mainly because it was word of mouth. People in the industry are very close to each other. People in the VR industry in general are close. So they talk to each other and they spread the product that way. We haven't obviously done any marketing because we're more focused on getting our product out first, and then we do marketing after when there's available product to sell. So no, we've done no marketing, but it has been working so far.
No marketing at all, not even social media?
Nope. We have some social media posts, but they primarily relate to our status and development, things like that. Not really so much selling the product as much they are as, oh, look how much more accurate we've made our mouse tracking system, from year to year or from month to month or whatever, improvement we've made that is significant enough to post about. And that normally garners a bit of attention and enough attention to fuel it, even though we aren't directly marketing for the product itself.
Do you have any website that you sell through, or is it through Amazon? How would a user want to buy your product?
Yeah, we sell through babel.diy. It's a site that you can go, obviously, to buy our product on. We self-host our own site. Obviously, we don't like Amazon taking middleman fees from us, and we have our own distributors and suppliers and whatnot who produce and sell and distribute our product for us on our behalf, and we license to them our designs. So that's how that works, is that we basically have our own site, and then we have our own system for building these products and then shipping them.
Just to clarify a little bit, another key point I really wanted to touch upon is the idea of what current events are affecting businesses globally. And I talked about this in my earlier episode, but mainly there's been tariffs, and they've been thrown around, not even sure what percentage you're going to get. But if you saw like a roughly 30, 40, 50% tariff on wherever you get your goods, how would that affect your business?
Badly, of course. I mean, obviously we import a lot of things into the US, especially from China, especially from other places. But at the same time, we've been sort of slowly diversifying our in-country development, right? We're trying to make things more in-house. And so that helps make the tariff fears less, right? It would obviously impact our business, right? But we are working on scaling towards, more in-house development with local here in California. So it makes it less scary when you're making sure that that the money that you are making is being put into investment that is secure, right? So it becomes a little less scary over time. it is definitely bad if if the tariff was raised anymore. We would obviously run into some issues, seeing as that we're a U.S. based company and we're importing from China and our assembly happens here. It would be a bit of an issue. But at the same time, we are, like I said, spending money on building infrastructure inside of the states, and therefore these sorts of short-term tariff costs are simply costs of doing business rather than long-term costs that we have to suffer with. So those sort of fears kind of go away when you realize that you can slowly start moving production back into the U.S. as long as you can find the correct suppliers and whatnot that are able to sustain, whatever product you're hoping at, whatever margin you want. But yeah, that's kind of where we're going with that.
What kind of industry are you talking about?
What do you mean industry?
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure. So mainly warehouses, PCBs, factories that assemble and design these circuits that we use on those PCBs. So you have like the silicon themselves that needs to be manufactured into chips, and those chips get placed on the PCBs, and the PCBs get soldered together. And so that whole entire pipeline has to exist somewhat domestically. Some parts are okay to import from outside the US, especially at our scale, because these cents cost maybe cents on the dollar, right? They're not very expensive parts. But certain parts, like the microcontrollers and whatnot, need to have some sort of domestic form of, sourcing, because they are so expensive to get from outside the US. So that infrastructure has to be in here. And finding that infrastructure in the US is also difficult, right? Versus China, where finding their infrastructure, getting access to their, manufacturing infrastructure is extremely easy. It's literally like 2 or 3 sites that you can go to get access to almost all of their specialized technical infrastructure. But for us, it's not that simple. In the US, there is no common platform that exists for something like that. So it makes it very difficult to find these sorts of structured, places to go and get things that are manufactured inside the US. And, that's kind of difficult. So you have to call people up manually. You have to go hunt for websites. You have to go, talk to these other factories and people who are running those factories and see what they can offer you and what their rates are and whatnot. So yeah, that's what we mean by infrastructure, is not necessarily building out the infrastructure ourselves, but building out the networking required to utilize the United States' already existing infrastructure, if there is even any that we can utilize for some part or some process that we use for producing our products.
Are you the sole decision maker who decides to put more infrastructure in California or draw back? Are you the only person who makes those kind of decisions?
That's not exactly true. Yeah, we have a board. There's a board who approves these decisions. I don't ever act alone in that case. And we always, when making a significant investment into anything, always refer to the board for any sort of advice and sort of ideas that they may have to reduce or make costs easier on us. Because, a lot of those guys are also technical business guys and also, technical engineers who understand, what our goal is. And so the board normally helps us out in helping us decide whether it's worth pursuing something inside the US or not. But yeah, we're not the only ones, or I'm not the only one who makes these decisions alone. I always act with some validation or with knowing the consequences that outlined by the board or somebody within the company has told me. So yeah.
With that in mind, where do you see, with that advice, where do you see your business in the next 5 years, and where do you see the VR industry in the next 5 years?
That's always a difficult question to answer. A lot of it, I think, is about what consumers want and what companies think those consumers want. At least for the next 5 years, I think we'll continue to grow pretty steadily. Even in our niche, we still have not completely saturated our market. So I see ourselves within the next 5 years saturating that market with our products, right? After that, it's kind of up to these bigger companies who produce VR headsets to properly start trying to push these things to mainstream, right? I can't say whether that'll happen in the next 5 years or not, but I can say that the technology will get better. Lenses will get better, displays will get better, VR headsets will become more affordable to more people. And so, this push it into the mainstream will hopefully also help accelerate our business. And if not, like I said, R&D is always very useful, no matter what scale you are, right? Whatever research you've developed is useful to somebody. So we can always pivot pretty easily with our eye tracking technology to something else, maybe medical research, maybe something else. But I think for now, in the next 5 years, we'll be kind of basically saturating our own market, improving our own products, giving ourselves a really good name and rep in the industry. I think that's what we're going to be doing for the next 5 years, probably.
What do you think of your business being tied to bigger companies? Do you think that's a good situation, or do you think you guys are going to have to try pushing your own product out there to make a bigger field?
Yeah, there's definitely that sort of thought that it does occur to me, but there's not much you can do because unfortunately VR headsets and the industry that we're in requires very big players to push these things in the first place, right? I hope in the future that we'll be able to push these things ourselves, right? With newer headsets and lenses and displays, like we can design those in-house ourselves. But the reality of it is that you need big companies with even larger investments than your own to produce these things, right? To create markets for you to exist in. For us, it's not necessarily the most stable thing to have, but there luckily are a couple of companies who are producing headsets and continue to do so. So I think for the time being, we're pretty safe. And also all these other bigger companies are always, of course, competing with each other to create the next best headset to, be the ones who push it to mainstream. So I think we'll be okay for quite some time with that, on that regard, basically.
All right, well, we're wrapping up now, and I have one more question for you. So this is it. After starting your business, what's one lesson that you learned about yourself, and how can you apply that to helping other young entrepreneurs who might want to innovate in the tech and VR spaces?
I guess what I'll say is you can never do it alone. But at the same time, you want to build a team of people that you trust, right? When you go out and you start these sorts of things, make sure that the people that you bring on are people who you trust, right? People who are technically experts at their field, people who are trustworthy, people who are excellent, right? Because you can't do it alone. There are very few cases in which a single person is able to create all this alone, right? Even if it's just one other person, right? You can rely on this other person to help you, achieve your goals or achieve the company's goals, right? And I'd say in general for tech entrepreneurs, right, you won't be able to do this alone, right? You are not, the first and last person to try this, right? And so you will need help from others to make this work. And so what I can say is that you should find people who you trust and bring them on, and then with them helping you fulfill whatever you would like to fulfill with your company, but make sure you get people who you trust.
All right, thank you so much, Samir. Thank you all for listening for this edition of our podcast. We'll be back. Hopefully you'll listen to the next one. Thank you guys so much.